Welcome to Health IQ, a podcast from the Quay County Health Council. In this podcast, we are exploring a variety of health topics that affect our community and probably yours too. We are not professional podcasters, but volunteers that have a passion for wellness. We will share practical ideas and resources for people with limited access to services, and we have some fun tips to help you and your family stay healthy and well. Increase your health IQ as you listen to our members as they talk and share with experts and others about the health matters that matter to you.
Men living with anxiety and stress, how to help.
Welcome to this episode of Health IQ. We are so happy that you decided to listen to this important topic. As a society, we often discuss stress sort of in general, but we don't really focus on the root causes or the different kinds of stress that men are under. Many of these causes are rooted in our culture and our history. Hello, I am Brenda Bishop, the coordinator for the Quay County Health Council, and we are very appreciative of today's guest for helping us break some of the stigma associated with stress that men face. Joining me at our table is Gordan Runyan, pastor of Immanuel Baptist Church here in Tucumcari. Joyce Runyan, one of our crew members, is also joining us at the table with some important insight as well. And our other crew member today is Bobby Hockaday. Thank you, Gordan, for joining us. And I thought we'd just open with you wanted to give a few statements, a little bit about yourself and on this topic.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I just wanted to make sure to make it known that my qualifications to speak on some of this are pretty thin. It's just that I have 20 years of experience as a pastor and dealing with people and kind of just boots on the ground and trying to work with people and walk them through the rough situations that they're going through. And I have noticed in that time some patterns that keep reoccurring and some similarities. And I thought it would be interesting to just talk about a little slice of some conditions that I've noticed are stress-related. And I think it's interesting to note that men and women think differently. We're not the same creatures, and men deal with stress and are affected by stress in a way that maybe women would be surprised to hear or doesn't seem natural to them. So just in that vein, just trying to bring some experience and hopefully provide some
And we had
insight.
this conversation a few months ago when we were talking about this topic, and you had such insight, and I was just like, wow. It made me really think about things I hadn't really thought about. Even though I know that we think differently, it's just hadn't really thought about that. So you were talking about some of the key pressures. So what are some of those pressures that men face that add to this stress?
Yeah, and they're pressures that men face kind of uniquely. And I need to say that too. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to be generalizations, and you can find outliers and you can find exceptions and stuff like that. So I'm not giving out blanket rules. I'm just saying generally you find men suffering with stresses that women generally don't in the same way. One of those is that men struggle under the stress of needing to be providers, protectors, and leaders for their family. And I'm not sure women are always thinking in those categories. They've got other categories like nurturing and comforting and things of that nature. To a certain extent, those three categories, provider, protector, and leader, they're very cultural, and they come at us from the culture. You see it a lot, and men are kind of bombarded with these ideas. I don't think they're bad. I think those are right stresses. I think a man that's got his head screwed on correctly is concerned about providing and protecting and being a decent leader for his family. And so I think although they are cultural and historical and they come at men, there's something inside us that brings those up as well. There's a source of that in us. And I'm a Christian pastor. I know not everybody listening is a Christian. I just want to point out, though, that these stresses that I've mentioned, they really are consistent with the oldest, what I think is the oldest, most consistent biblical metaphor for leadership, and that is the shepherd. The shepherd was always having to provide for the sheep by finding the best places for them to be. Mm-hmm. He had to protect them like King David did against lions and bears and wolves or whatever. And, that involved leadership. I got to get you to the right place in the right way so that you don't fall off a cliff or something like that. So, and then Jesus comes along later and calls himself the Good Shepherd. And so I feel like this is a very consistent metaphor throughout the Bible and kind of relates to this. So I think it's good for men to want to be all those things. And I would also point out, most of the women that I interact with on this count, most women kind of want their man to be that as well.
But I could see that if for some kind of circumstance that happened in their life or whatever, and they can't be one or all of those things, that could add even more stress because you're being
unable to fulfill those callings, I would say.
Yeah.
Right. And even if the wife or the woman who is looking to the man to be one or all of these things, even if she's not purposely adding stress where he's falling short, she may be okay with waiting and giving him time to kind of get up to speed or whatever that is. But he's going to be feeling that. And so it's very hard. You kind of led me right into the first pattern that I've noticed, and specifically counseling with men who, for one reason or another, like you mentioned, it can be physical ailment or injury, can be just the advance of age, where suddenly men who have been all these things find themselves in a place where I just can't do that anymore. And I have found numerous cases where this is extremely stressful and psychologically even damaging for the man's assessment of himself. I'm no longer a man because I can't do what I used to do. And like we've got a brother in our congregation now who he's always been up and going. He's always been the worker, and just having to go through a period of time where, because of medical issues, he had to slow down. And he just couldn't get up and go. Man, you might as well have tortured him. He considered it torture, very hard. And, Joyce is kind of the same way. It's hard to make Joyce slow down. She's always up and going, but it doesn't hurt her if she has to slow down. Yeah. She can deal with that.
I think some of that is just the identity that you talked about, that these things define who I am. And so when some of that is gone, it's tragic. It's damaging. Really does hurt them. Damaging in a lot of ways.
Well, and those medical issues, I can totally relate. Yeah. And then it brings along depression, and
sure.
And then you have to struggle to get through that as well. And then you still have the original stressor.
Mm-hmm. And what happens, what I've noticed, some of these guys that are dealing with this, they think less of themselves when they're going through it. And in their head, they can't imagine that their wife doesn't also think less of them. And so there's kind of this underlying, oh, you must be resenting me now and stuff like that. And it's just a spiral, and it's circling the drain. And guys really need some help with this sometimes.
Well, sometimes our thoughts are our own worst enemy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely. And I would just point out that we've kind of already mentioned it, but a man tends to value himself based on what he has done or what he does or what he accomplishes. Mm-hmm. And you've all seen this happen where you get people at a party or something where they're meeting each other for the first time, or on an airplane. When two men meet that haven't met each other before, it's minutes. 2 minutes later, they're talking, hey, what do you do for a living? And, well, this is what I do for a living. And it's kind of tough if you do something for a living that maybe you're not super proud of, or you realize it's maybe not the most outstanding thing. And this is just a thing that men have. I have noticed, again, speaking as a Christian, I think a big part of helping men is to remind them that their real value as a human being, a person made in the image of God, their value isn't in what they do or what they can provide. As a Christian, I believe your value is in the price that was paid for you by Christ. Just free market concepts here. You may think that you're offering a product that's worth $200, but if $50 is all that anybody's willing to pay, your product is worth $50, regardless of what's in your head. And so consequently, when you realize the extreme price that God has paid to bring men back, men and women, everybody, but it's still a gigantic price. And to me, I think if you can get people to see my value is in what God says about me and not what I say about myself or whatever.
Or, just TV shows, commercials, everything,
Absolutely.
all play into what we think we should be.
Yeah.
And maybe that's really not what we were intended to be.
Well, there's a lot of comparison that goes on, which can be, like he was saying, really damaging that, well, I don't do what you do. And so because of that, I'm not as important. But I really think that everybody has their place and their talents. And you have those specific to you that nobody else does have. So, you are valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just wanted to note one of the simple things that does help in this situation. I'm sure we'll get into other things later, and we may say them a few times, but maintaining a proper diet and decent exercise, this really helps when men are in this loss of activity sort of situation. Sometimes it's due to health issues, though, and they may not be able to be as part of what they're struggling with. I just can't be as able and active. So, but if you can get those things in and help, and also I've noticed that what stress does in older men especially is it capitalizes on our natural loss of testosterone as we age. And testosterone is hugely important for a man. And when that goes down, it wrecks everything. It really does. And if you can get an older man especially to check with the doctor about maybe getting some testosterone replacement, that can be surprisingly and greatly helpful.
Well, I think that diet thing is so important, even, for all things, but it really does help if we're not eating those, what we consider comfort foods, the candies, the cakes, and all that, because that sugar up and down adds to that depression.
Right.
And then a lot of people also resort to other substances.
Alcohol, right.
Alcohol or other things that also are depressants or do not help them actually get past the issue at hand.
It doesn't address the issue.
Right.
It skirts around it. And it's a pain reliever is what it is. They're pain relievers.
Exactly. I want to move on if we can. Can I leave this and go to the next topic? Okay. Personal experience coming in here, and not just me, but I've talked to other men who have experienced it. I have recently been afflicted with what my doctor referred to as general anxiety disorder. And the way I had it explained to me, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professional, but the way I had it explained to me is that you get men who are competent and achievers and getting things done, and especially men who feel a pressure to provide and all that. What happens is if they get involved in a high-stress job or a job that is very demanding, we're just too scared of the thought that maybe our kids are going to wind up without food, my family's going to be homeless. I don't care what the stress is. I don't care what the weight is. I'm just going to power my way through. I'm just going to muscle through the obstacles. If I have to go through the brick wall, that's what I'm going to do. And men who spend decades working like that, they're really not getting rid of the stress and they're really not dealing with it. They're just finding a way to kind of shove it to the side. Mm-hmm. And then what happens often when a guy retires from a high-stress job or something else happens that removes that constant stressor that's been there for decades, if that's suddenly gone, the guy may think for a few minutes, oh, whew, I'm glad that's over. But then all that stuff that he hasn't been dealing with appropriately kind of finds a way to come back on him all at once. And it can result, well, not just for me, it resulted in waking up in the middle of the night for no reason with my heart racing. I could see if I was having a nightmare or something like that, but just for no reason, I wake up and I feel like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Am I in trouble, about to have a heart attack? And I had one friend that was in that situation where he's waking up like that and never got it figured out for over the course of 3 years before he was finally able to get out from under that. All that cortisol and stress hormones, they just come back on you. And it can be I think it can be deadly. This is just me connecting dots, but I don't know how many times I've heard about men who retire after a long time from a high stress job, and in a couple of months they're dead. And I just connect some dots here and think, the guy who's stuck by himself, I can't sleep, and the less I sleep, the more this comes on me, and I just can't get away from it. Things should be good, but they're worse than they've ever been in my life. That sets guys up for self-harm and stuff like that as well. So
I had a coworker who, though he hadn't retired and he was younger, but the stress of the job and the pressure he put on himself to be excelled. Right. And then because he was having blood sugar issues, they all culminated at the same time and had some of those same anxiety things. Right. And ended up having to leave his job. Yes. Just in order to be healthy. Yeah. Yeah. And that's sad, but sometimes that is what has to, something has to give. But that's where that diet thing gets back into helping you manage some of that stress. It's not all of it.
Yeah, you're really right.
But then there's the exercise also helps. But what are some other things that you think helps with dealing with some of that anxiety?
Well, especially that general anxiety disorder, I'd again really highlight it's worth going to see a doctor. I don't think God created us as separate beings. You don't have a mental life here and a physical life here, but it's all very holistic, and brain stuff can be physical stuff as well, and mental health can be physical health at the same time. So it is worth going to see the doctor. Diet and exercise, stress coping techniques. I bet you could do a 10-second Google search and find
a lot of things.
A million of those. As a pastor, though, I would completely include things like prayer and scripture meditation. A lot of Christians know they should be memorizing scripture and they don't. And one of the things that can make it easier is you memorize your one verse and then keep calling it back during the day and just kind of meditate on it that way. And I find that to be helpful. One thing that's been helpful for me is learning how to regulate my breathing for the purpose of stress reduction. And it's been crazy because I don't even like to admit that I'm suffering with stress. That's how much the male thing is going on with me. I think it's a sign of weakness to realize, that guy got stressed out and look at him now. And I don't even want to admit that. But to be able to just breathe through it sometimes and visualize and kind of lower your own heart, learn how to slow down your own heart, that's been helpful. When I went to the doctor about it, she was able to point me to some essential oils that can be helpful. And she recommended just putting them right over my heart sometimes, calming oils like clary sage and lavender, and also oils to help your liver, because the liver is involved in dealing with cortisol and stuff like that. So citrus oils like orange and tangerine just placed right over your
So you
liver.
had been doing the oils as a response when you were waking up in that situation, and her recommendation was to do it proactively. Right. So before you went to bed, you would put those things on and to help you.
And in fact, she's a acupuncturist. You know her, Tina, Dr. Tina. She did one session of acupuncture on me, and 4 days after that, I wasn't having any more of those episodes. It was kind of a one and done sort of treatment. So if you don't have objections to giving an alternative treatment a try. And I think it really worked for me.
I not really quite sure what all acupuncture cures, so I would not have even thought about it being anxiety or stress or.
Well, it sure has helped me a lot. I attribute a lot to that myself.
Well, I know, like when I'm stressed, I assume into that I feel it like in my neck and my shoulders, and so relaxation things to help relax those. But I could see where acupuncture might help with that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why it helps, but I think that it does. Then I have some ideas for how you can help a man who's struggling with stress-related issues, maybe as a wife or just someone who lives in the house or just wants to be a friend. Before I say any of these, I just want to let you know that it's not complex. And I don't think that you have to be a professional in order to really help a guy. But you kind of have to work through the strong, silent type of guy, because it's just the way men think. If I'm bearing my weaknesses and telling you about how I'm really feeling, I'm going to be diminished by that and not be helped. So you kind of have to deal with that. And so my first point is that the man has to feel safe in talking to you. And my recommendation is don't be offended if he makes it clear to you that maybe you're not the one that he needs to talk to. That can just be the way it is. And maybe you have a pastor or you have a counselor, somebody that's not tied into his life so intimately. Sometimes the best guy to talk to is somebody that you just ran into who has no stake or bearing in your life. And you might be able to just bear a lot of information to that guy. So think about that. The second thing was simply being able to talk about what's bugging him, even if you can't provide any solutions, will greatly lessen his burden. And I'm bearing a secret here. Most of my pastoral counseling is based on this idea that if you just give people space to say what's going on with them, my estimation is that reduces their burden by half. They walk out of your office feeling almost twice as good as they came in. And then the more they can keep talking about it, every time they do, it cuts it in half again. And again, even if I don't have any solution for them, and everybody can do that, you can just listen and coax somebody into just coming clean about what's going on with them. And I guarantee you they're going to feel helped by that. It almost works like magic. The other thing I have is sometimes just being there, sometimes just showing up is a good thing. If you know somebody but you're not terribly close and you want to be some kind of help to them, sometimes just offering the help and just showing up for them is a really big deal. People lose family members or something, and you feel bad for them and you want to help them through their grieving, but who in the world knows what to say in that situation? And I think sometimes we're really restricted from helping because we know beforehand, I'm not smart enough to deal with this. I don't have any magic answers. And the good news is you don't have to. Just show up. Joyce and I have been through some things that friends tried to help us. They didn't know what to say. Some of what they did say, I'm sure, was stupid, but they're trying and they're there. And Joyce and I can't remember the individual things that were said, but we know who showed up. I just leave that with you. I think just being there is a big deal. And related to that is don't underestimate the power of an appropriate touch. I admit this sounds more girly than manly, but sometimes you'd be surprised how much a man can be helped by an appropriate touch. And if you're a wife, that's different. You can touch him however you want to. But like if it's me talking to another guy, I try to remind myself at some point, I need to just put a hand on this guy, on his shoulder, or even if he's crying or something, I'll maybe one hand massage on his neck, a pat on the back. Or I had a guy one time, I was unburdening myself to him. He was a much older guy, but he reached across the table and grabbed my hand. So as I'm laying everything out for him, it felt ridiculous at first, but here's this guy holding my hand, and that was cool. After a little while, I was like, thank you for doing that. And my mentor, when I was just learning to be a pastor, he used to tell me, anytime you go like minister in a nursing home or something like that, a lot of those folks aren't going to hear you or understand what you're saying or remember it, but they need to be touched. You need to put a hand on them. And that's just a really simple, you don't need a PhD to do any of those things that I've talked about here. And my experience is that they're extremely helpful. Just be there for him. Don't force anything out of him, but be available. That's my bottom line.
I think what you said with that touch is really important, because our culture is one where, men are rough and tumble and we fall down and we get back up and, I don't need no thank you. But we are people that, we need to be comforted, and we need that touch. And so I think, especially for guys, because, girls, we're always like, oh, let me hug you goodbye. Oh, let me hug you hello.
Right.
And guys just aren't like that. Right. And it's very much our culture, because there are other cultures where they're just more interactive, and holding hands or giving a hug is just everyday kiss on the cheek. Let me kiss you 3 times on the cheek. And that's what everybody does. So right. I think that's a really big, important thing to remember, that's okay. It's okay for you to do that.
Right.
Well, and there's a lot of studies, even from newborns, about the importance of touch, no matter what the gender. So that's an important thing.
That's a big deal.
So this time of our podcast, we usually do some food for thought.
Okay.
And so our quote that we can talk about is, worry often gives a small thing a big shadow. And that's a Swedish proverb. But when you were talking about how the cycle, and we just keep thinking, and that's our mind giving that big shadow because we're worrying.
Right.
But
there was one like that I remember, where it was something like, he who worries suffers through the thing twice. If you just went through it, that'd be one thing, but you're suffering multiple times before it happens, and it may not ever happen. And
yeah. And I often say that when you do that, you're wearing ruts in your mind, and then you can't really see any other options anymore, because you've thought about it so many times that this is the only way it can go. I have no options. This is all there is. And like you said, speaking that out and sharing that to someone makes such a big difference. And not that they can solve that issue or that they can, magic it away, but just sharing that burden just gives you a lightness that you wouldn't have had previously.
Just recently, I was talking to a guy, and he was kind of telling me why things are hard in his life. And after he was done saying it, he said, well, now that I've said it out loud, I kind of think, why was I so upset about this?
It's not so bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
That ability just to talk to somebody, or the need to talk to somebody, is important.
Huge.
So we'd like to thank you with a small token of our appreciation for coming. Your very own Health IQ Tumbler.
I'd like to thank the Academy.
We do appreciate you coming. And thank all of you for joining us today as we tackled this very important topic of anxiety disorder faced by men. Be sure to come back for our next episode, because I'm sure it will be something that will be important to you to improve your health or your family's health. Thank you.
Special thanks to our guest contributors, Gordan Runyan, author and pastor at Immanuel Baptist Church, and Joyce Runyan, podcast committee. Our host was Brenda Bishop. Podcast crew, director Robert F. Hockaday, producer Robert F. Hockaday, and Joyce Runyan. Video crew was Robert F. Hockaday. Music provided by David Morris.
This podcast was made possible by a New Mexico Department of Health Better Together grant. Additional information about today's topic will be on the Health IQ blog located on the Quay County Health Council's website at www.qchealthcouncil.org. Be sure to follow the Quay County Health Council on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Quay County Health. This podcast was created solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for advice from a healthcare or mental health professional.